Hi there, hello, my name's Lines, it's great to see you. Now today we're going to be going through how to draw the upper body and the breasts. We'll be splitting this into two parts, part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is going to be this one, the instruction portion on how to do it. And then part 2 will be a demonstration of everything we've gone over today within the context of a full, completed professional illustration, and I'll do a speed paint of it from start to finish. So, this is part 1. The content we've got for this one is, we'll go over a simplified bone structure of the three main bone masses of the torso, how to map on simplified musculature, and then once we've done that, we'll be able to then build on that structure to add breasts in varying sizes and positions, and also how breasts behave differently from other body parts, how they're affected by gravity and external manipulation. Once we've gone over the principles, I'll do a page of demonstration to show you those principles in practice, and there'll be a homework sheet based on the demonstration section that you can follow along with yourself. If you've completed the homework sheet, pop into our Discord community, submit it there. I go through all the homework sheets as often as I can, and there's a link for that in the description. We also have now monthly events and activities on the Discord, so pop in to participate in them. The first one's already going. Last thing then, with the Patreon, if you like the videos and you'd like to see more of them or see them more consistently, consider becoming a member on our Patreon. For those who already have, I really do appreciate it. It's allowed me to invest a lot more time and effort in this, which I am incredibly grateful for. And we've also got a reward for Patreon members of the original PSD files of the images from the speed paint sections. Quick update in the small group classes. Planning's going well. The curriculum's being developed based on the submissions of interest I've had, and I should hopefully have a start date in the next month or so. And I do appreciate everyone's patience. Otherwise, press the like, subscribe buttons, etc. I like seeing the numbers go up, even though I don't know what they do. Now, let's get started. Starting off then, let's do three main bone masses: the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis. Now, I've got a video on how to put these together for both men and women, so I'll link that one there. So we're mainly just trying to get those basic shapes out. Now, this will be a male and female archetype that we'll start on. So we'll just get those major bone points there. These are the unmovable things, the things that do not squish. That's the head, a bone mass, the rib cage, a bone mass, and the pelvis, a bone mass. And then we'll do the male body as well. So with that one, you can see we're going for a different shape for the chest. We'll split that torso section into thirds to help us place where the pecs go, and the top third, the middle third will be the ab zone, and the bottom third is the pelvis. And we're going to join those balls for the shoulders into the center. And those points there are going to be very important because they're anchor points for a lot of construction. And then we'll do the traps that come around behind the shoulder, and we're also going to split that collarbone down the middle, and that'll give us a good guideline for where to draw the sides of the pectoral muscles. And then we have them coming up towards the shoulder ball. Lastly, we draw a line down to the navel, and on that line will be where the nipples are, and then where those two lines cross the pectorals, that's where we start the band of muscle moving down the center. Again, I do have an in-depth video on putting together the male form, so I'll link that one there. This is to build on that video. Now, with that, we'll also do a back view of the male figure. Now, the musculature will be the same for both the male and female figures, but with a male figure, we'll probably want to have the musculature more pronounced as a sort of masculinizing element. So we'll start then with the traps, have them come down, and then we'll draw a line that's a sort of like a radiation out from the ball of the shoulder that comes halfway to the center line for where we'll put that shoulder blade and where we put those muscles there. Again, below that, we'll put the bands of muscle that come around from the sides, the lateral. So we'll do a bit of a more in-depth on the musculature later on, but this is just the steps there. Now, one thing we'll notice is how we have a male and female figure proportioned differently. You can see on the female figure, the rib cage is long, but it's very narrow, and the pelvis is very wide, but not very long. Whereas you'll notice on a male figure, the rib cage is the same length as it is width. Now, the pelvis is still wider than it is tall, but you'll notice that the difference in making a torso look male and female comes a lot down to the choice of proportioning, where a female rib cage will typically be long and narrow, their pelvis will be wide and short. Whereas on a male figure, the pelvis is the same, a little smaller maybe, but the chest will be as wide as it is tall. So that's one of the things you can do to help communicate that masculinizing element. One of the other things you can do is the shape of the rib cage. So on a more female presenting character, you'll have the rib cage tend to taper up towards the top, whereas on a male one it doesn't. And then also, you'll have the difference in shoulder width. Mainly that's because of the width of the rib cage. Now, this is not to say that there's just the two sides of the coin. You can have a male character with a lot of feminizing traits. You can have a female character with a lot of masculinizing traits, or somewhere in the middle. As I'm sure a lot of people can attest, it's not really a binary thing. You can pick what elements you want from what area to make everything from femboys, tomboys, muscle mommies, etc. You just have to choose what elements you want to add and what impression you want to give about that character to your desired audience. So just do keep that in mind, that when I'm talking in this video about a male and female figure, I'm talking about a basic set of elements, but those are things you can mix and match to make whatever kind of character impression you want. They're just sort of starting points, but that mix can be really important for developing your own character. Now, we'll start on just some simple structures for how to piece the muscles together. So on the female figure and the male figure, the most important part of the upper body is this, that central point in the middle of the rib cage where the muscles of the neck join and where the collarbones join out to the balls for the shoulders. They're very important. And then another important set of anchor points is halfway along the collarbone. That one helps you build things like the chest and the shoulders as well. So knowing that the upper arms tend to have a bulge at the top and then either a bulge or a concave section for the next 2/3, that bulge at the top is made of, I think it's the deltoid, the muscle that comes over the shoulder there. And that's how we place that. We start that halfway along the collarbone and then move it to about 1/3 of the way down the arm. And that's that muscle there that allows you to lift the muscle up. Now at the back, we've got muscles that you'll see when the arms are sort of out and up or when they're from behind. Now, as far as how to get that little ridge for the rib cage, one easy way to do it is to split the rib cage into quarters, and it'll be the bottom quarter of it. And then, on how to place the bottom edge of the pectoral muscles, again, this is not the breast, this is the pectoral muscles, they're usually about 2/3 of the way up the torso. So if you measure from the collarbone to the crotch, it's 2/3 of the way up, and that's where the pectorals will go. And they join in over towards the shoulders. Now for this figure, we're just going to do basic forms. Now the next thing is how to do that band of the abs on a female character. Now they do go all the way down to the crotch, but we'll typically pronounce them as a sort of, as ending just below the navel or a bit below the navel. So we'll do a band of muscle that comes down the middle of the body. That's essentially the middle half. And then we want to join the rib cage to the hips. We can essentially imagine it's like 2 blocks with a balloon wrapped around it that'll pull in around the edges there. And now, I do have a separate video on how to shape the limbs, but just very quickly, for the upper arms, they get wider for the first third and they narrow for the next 2/3. And the wrist, the inside of the wrist, is going to be a little bit concave, but the outside of the wrist will actually stick out a little bit. Again, I do have more detail on this on the how to shape limbs video or on the complete female figure drawing one. This is just more of an in-depth one on how to get the structure right to be able to lay the musculature and breasts. Now from behind, the female back is the same as the male back, it's just what you choose to pronounce and how much. Now you can see that we can't really see the collarbones from the back, but a lot of the other structural elements are the same. So we'll have that bulge for the top part of the shoulder, where those deltoids, I think, that come out. And then we'll also have the traps drawn in. So they are the muscles that help your neck move sort of left and right. They will be, usually they'll come up to about 1/3 of the way up the neck, but if you have a very muscular character, they'll come up even higher. Again, the shoulder blades are built the same way. You have a line with the same radial pattern as the circle for the shoulder ball, about halfway into the center line. As far as how to draw the butts and crotches, I have a separate video on that one. I'll link that one as well. Now on the male figure, the musculature is even more pronounced. That same crucial element is required with the neck, with all those lines joining in to the center of those 2 collarbones that join over the top of the shoulders. The male front of the neck has a sort of ridge at the front of it. That's what makes a neck look more male. It's not as flat at the front. That's the Adam's apple. Now, as far as the neck, a very muscular character can be described as having no neck. What it is it's the muscles around the neck that come up higher and higher that make the neck less visible. And that's up to you how you choose to characterize them. So again, like on the female figure, we'll draw a line out towards the shoulders from halfway along the collarbones. That'll help us do the pectorals, and I think the deltoids they're called. And then below that, we can do the biceps. Now on the male arm, one good way to simplify it is, I saw a graphic on this years ago that stuck with me, which is you build it sort of like links in a chain. So if you think of the deltoid muscle on top as coming over, and then you think of the biceps as 2 ones that come out around, and then lastly the upper arm is one coming over. So that can be a good way to sort of conceptualize the volumes. Now same thing with the chest we did before. So the mid-third of the torso is the abs zone, and the bottom is the pelvis, and the top is the pecs. we'll draw some diagonal lines out to the corners of the rib cage to help us put where I think their traps are. And then the lateral muscles on the side, I'm going to oversimplify them just because they don't represent large volumes. So to start off with, it can be good just to draw them as a sort of a sheet of muscle covering it and add the little zigzaggy muscles at the top there as more of a textural element, since they don't represent a lot of volume. Of course, you can go more in depth with it. Now, moving on to the back. On the back of the neck, in male characters, you'll have a very prominent jutting out section of bone that comes out from the muscle. It's sort of like the mast on a boat. It's where all the sort of lines attach to and pull from. So you'll have those muscles on the back there, that big sort of diamond shape there, but you'll have the bone jutting out that a lot of it attaches to. And the shoulders on the sides are the same as the front. So they cover around the shoulder and go down into the biceps. And again, like we've talked about before, the shoulder blades are that radial pattern that comes in about halfway to the center. We then have the traps, I think they're called, and then the lateral muscles that wrap around from the front to the back. So where you can see on the front, they're tilting down, they still tilt down towards the back as well. Now on the male butt, I do have a video on how to draw the butt. A simplified version of it is a male butt is like a female butt, but without those bits of fat on the side that fill in those dimples. You can of course express them in a less, overly muscular fashion, but that's one of the ways to make it look more muscular or more male. And again, the forearm is the same, just remembering to add those little corners of bone on the elbows where it juts out. Now, one other thing I want to talk about is how we bend the neck. So I'll quite often see people moving the neck as though the neck is this rigid stick thing, and they'll rotate the top of the head as though it's on a swivel joint. But what actually happens is the neck is a series of small joints in a line, sort of like a body of a snake. And so when you bend the neck sideways, all those little joints bend, and the head will actually get a lot closer to the shoulder as well. So it's important to remember to move it closer and move the whole thing over. You can't tilt your head without moving your neck like a snake. So we'll do a figure in context here. So I'll just do a quick pose. Now I'm going to draw the breast on this one. We are going to get to how to draw the breasts, but I just want to have them included in this figure so I can talk about the volumes present as a sort of short summary of what we've gone over. So we've got the body based on the musculature built on top of the bones, keeping in mind how the bones will move. And now I'll just quickly drop some tone on here to best communicate the volumes. And then I'll show you how all of the soft, fleshy parts of the body here are defined by those basic bits of musculature. There's always going to be more depth you can go into with muscle anatomy, and we will go into them in future, but this is just a simple one of a few simple shapes to get you drawing the figure well. And now, over the top of this, let's draw some of the muscles. So you can see the pectorals are still there under the breast. They don't sort of replace them. They're always there as well. So they're a very hard element that's built to the body, whereas the breasts are something that's added on top of all these elements. So we're adding the band of muscle down the middle with the third of the torso above the navel for the ab zone. We're adding the zigzaggy muscles on the side, and then those lateral sheets of muscle. And then of course, we've got the traps. And then as we do, you can see all these forms and shapes are those elements of musculature. Now, another thing I want to talk about is how we communicate viewing angle and how that affects the collarbone and shoulders. So looking directly from above, we can see that the ball joints for the shoulders are actually slightly back towards the back of the rib cage, and the collarbones come forward to a point at the very front. What this means is as you tilt up and down, the collarbones will be drawn very differently, and you'll see different amounts of the neck. So we'll do on the left, straight on, in the middle, from below, and on the right, from above, with the character either bending forward or being viewed from above. And you can see just how much of the neck you do and don't see based on that. The rib cage has the collarbones at the very top and very front, so there'll be very much a sort of hill you'll have to look over if you're looking from below. And now with just a basic set of where the pec muscles would be, you can see just how different it is in how you communicate that viewing angle. So keep that in mind when you're doing different angles. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is how the collarbones and shoulders move. This one's a very common issue I see. So when the arm lifts, the shoulder lifts, no exceptions. If you want to try this at home, try putting your arm up in the air without moving your shoulder up at all. It is literally impossible. And since we've talked about how all the muscles attach to those collarbones, a movement of the arm upwards will change very significantly all of the shapes on the chest. So we use a male figure for this one, you can see here, and as that arm has moved up, the collarbone has moved up, which has pulled the pectoral muscle up, which is shown as part of the underarm and some of the muscles from the back. And you can also see it can really help with that movement if I move some of the abdominal muscles up a little bit on the side. So let me throw some tone over that so you can sort of see those shapes a bit better. So we'll just give them a bit more form. This is why I chose a male figure, because their musculature can really sort of show movement and volume really well, because they've got sort of more volume to the muscle typically. Again, like I talked about before though, you can have a very muscular female character doing the same thing. This is just using that as a sort of shorthand. Now, showing that then on a less muscular female character then, knowing what we know about what will be moved, we'll do a sort of very classic sort of sexy arms up sort of pose. So the first thing you see is that as the arms go up, the collarbones have to go up, which means it'll change where all those muscles sit. So they're all going to be pulled upwards, and so are the muscles on the back, because the muscles on the back also attach to the shoulders. The other thing that's worth keeping in mind is as you bend your elbow, you pull all the muscles and flesh away from the bone, which means you'll get these little sort of hard bony corners on the elbows whenever you bend your elbows. So that's worth keeping in mind to help give that a bit of shape, so they're not just sort of a very simplified sort of rounded shape. Now, draw the breasts on here. Again, we are going to go through how to structure these, but I just want to show another thing about it is that even if you have this, which is a pose that is all about showing off the breasts of a character, one of the things you'll notice is while they represent a significant amount of the focus, they don't actually necessarily represent a significant amount of the work involved in making that work. There are a few lines and a few bits of structure, but they only work because of the structure of the body they are sitting on top of. So if you do want that to be the focus of your image, almost ironically, you have to draw a lot more of other things if you want that to be the focus. You can't just have them on their own out of context or give them the only bit of focus in your image. If you want them to look good, the body they are on has to be well structured, because that's what they sit on, that's what they plug into. And I'll just draw a bit of tone on here, maybe in blue so the algorithm doesn't get upset with me. And you can see even as well with the tone, to sell that form and placement and focus, I'm putting a lot more tone and effort into more complicated shapes like the neck and shoulders so that I can sell the placement of the breast of the character. And so I'll do just a bit of darkness there down the front to really push that sort of surface plane there and give them a sort of presence and place. Now, next thing we do is I just want to show quickly the arms up from the front to talk about the volumes that are present. So this is without any breasts on there at all, just the musculature. It's worth remembering that the pectoral muscles, even on a very slight character, are one of the larger muscles on the body. They will have volume. So there's essentially a minimum amount of volume you can have on the chest of a character. They can't really be without any sort of depth. They can't be completely flat because you need muscles there to be able to move your arms. Even very stringy ones, they will present volume. Now, let's go through the basic method then of drawing the breasts in decent sizes from the front. So this is going to be a starting step. So we'll get the figure, same as before, bone masses, shoulders, collarbones. So the first thing we want to do is think about how big we want them. So for a basic set, we're going to do a 45-degree angle down from the tops of the shoulders into the center line of the rib cage. Then, the next guidelines we're going to make are going to be 45-degree lines starting from the center then and coming out towards the sides. And that'll give us the start of a sort of heart shape, an upside down heart shape that we can use then to draw the volume of the breasts. Remembering that they don't join up in the middle naturally. They'll only sort of touch together and create cleavage when they're pushed together by clothing or by external manipulation, which we will get to. The next thing to do is draw lines up from the sides into the bottom section of the shoulders. And then halfway down the collarbones, draw another pair of lines down diagonally like we did for the end of the pectoral muscles. And now you can see the breasts themselves aren't sort of teardrop shapes. They're actually more like a sort of a cartoony boot that comes down from the sides. That's where the breast tissue actually is, with two sections, that bottom sort of teardropping shape, which is where the volume of the breast is, And then that sort of rectangular section above them that curls around the pectoral, that's a transitional section. So that's where it sort of gets smoother and flatter and joins the shoulder. Because remember, the breasts are attached to the shoulders, and we'll talk about how that becomes relevant when we start moving the shoulders around. And we do still want to have a little bit of ridge of sort of shading there, but we don't want to necessarily have line work there. And I'll go over in green, again, those splits are those construction guidelines for how to get them started. And you can see that they're basically the two X's and the lines on the side. But you can also see the breasts don't necessarily come up and meet in the middle. There's that gap. And then underneath them, it can be worth imagining the area that they attach to the chest, because their volume will come out to the sides more than the area they attach to. So it's worth keeping that in mind. So I'll do that sort of transitional area in orange, and then the main mass of the breast in that sort of pinky purple there. And so that's where those sort of volumes are. I'll put a bit of shine on there to sort of help them communicate volume. And so that's a very basic way to do them, just from the front. Now the next thing we're going to do is, since this is for, cartoony and anime, one of the things people want to draw is anime-sized breasts. Now, they are as realistic as cyborgs in Unicorn, but as fun to draw. So let's get started. Now, with another figure, one thing that can help is do yourself a favor of giving yourself a big enough framework to build them on. So we're going to have a larger body for the character here. And you can see we're starting that cross line, but we're going much lower, at a much lower angle. And then the other cross that starts at the center of the collarbones, we're building that one out much wider. And you can see we draw the large sort of mass of the breast, the round sort of mass of the breast, out. The bigger that is, the further out it has to go. And then we've made those guidelines from the midpoint of the collarbones down and around to make those orange transitional segments. Now, sketching over, we're going to have them come into the center. And again, they won't join together in the middle unless they're in something that pushes them together. The other thing to remember is that they face out at different directions. The larger they are, the more they'll face out and away from each other, up to about probably a maximum of between 90 and 45 degrees. Whereas smaller ones will just sit on the surface, but larger ones will move further and further out, up to a limit. And if we then drop that same color on there, you can see that the mass in the center of them does change size significantly, but that transitional sort of connecting element, that stays about the same size, because it's more about the structural connection to the shoulder than the actual mass of the breast itself. And so we'll drop a bit of tone on that one to better describe the form. Again, we don't want to have sort of a cleavage ridge in the middle because they're not being pushed together, but we do want to use some tone to recognize that there is a change in volume and shape. Like between the breasts, there is a sort of flat section of the chest. And then below it, it's also worth remembering that as the breasts sit lower, more of the detail of the torso is hidden. I'll quite often see people who do enormous breasts, and then below them, they will draw all of the abs still visible, when, depending on the size, a few of them should be covered. So don't move those features of the torso and pelvis down to accommodate them. Those features are nailed on to the bones. They don't move. Whereas the breasts are on top of that, and their placement is quite a bit more dynamic. So they will move over and cover things the bigger they are. And again, we'll put a bit of shine on there to better communicate that sort of shape and volume. Lastly, I want to show the difference in how you describe someone who doesn't have much breast at all. So like we did with the larger figure, we'll make a smaller one so just it's a better fit for a more slight bust. You want a more slight character. You can, of course, contrast those, but that contrast will give a different impression, so it's worth keeping in mind. So same as before, lines in from the shoulders, then lines out from the center of the collarbones to define where the mass will be. But one thing you've got to remember is when you're describing things with line art, you're going to describe things with line art where something folds over and has an edge, but if the bust is quite slight, then there won't be folds over. So you'll be better off describing that with with tone instead of with line art, because there won't be a hard edge. And so with this one, I'm only even leaving that little bit of line art on the boob on the right as a guideline to put the tone on, so I can then delete the line art later, because it's a very slight edge there. It's not big enough or heavy enough to fold over on itself yet. So it won't actually create a line, it'll just have an edge of tone. So I'll just wipe that one out now, and you can see how it looks better without the line art, because we want to describe it as a more subtle form. And then we'll do the surface plane of the stomach underneath, and sort of imagining that band of muscle coming down as a guideline for where to place our shadows. I'll move that one over closer and make it a bit bigger so it's the right size. We'll turn our guidelines back on, and then we'll fill in those colored sections so you can see where the mass of the breast is and where that transitional element is. Seeing all three of them side by side, you can see that transitional section is the same size essentially for all of them. It joins to the shoulders. It's that mass section, that teardrop shape in the middle, that does change size. But that orange section is still part of the shape of it, still part of the shape of the breast, so you need to keep that in mind as well. Now, with the basic shapes there, let's talk about some of its properties. So one of the properties of the breast is how it will fit to whatever it's resting against. And at a minimum, it will be resting against the body. So we'll have a character here viewed from a low angle, remembering that the breast is a sort of internally structured, soft thing. So it's not like water, because it's still connected to itself. It's got tissue connecting all the way through it, but it is still soft, and it will change its shape based on whatever it's sitting on. Now, if you're standing, it'll be sitting against the body. It'll be resting on it like leaning a water bag against a wall. And that lower edge of the breast, when viewed from below, instead of seeing a bowing shape going down, we'll actually see the shape bow upwards, because from a low enough angle, we'll start to see how it's following the contour of the rib cage. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is how that looks when it's affected by gravity. So we'll do two figures here, one slight character and one very well endowed character. We'll do those construction lines on the chest, but that purple area, the mass of the breast, on very small breasted characters, they'll just come down. They won't sort of sit against the body. But then we go for a much larger character, some other things will start to happen. So on a much larger breasted character, the one on the right, as they come down, they can no longer move out towards the sides. Gravity will pull them down and together like a pendulum. And so you will get a line then of cleavage where the weight of them is pulling them directly down, which means they will be facing the same way, which normally they do not when they're resting on the chest, because they rest out to the sides. But you'll also notice that there's no Y-shaped cleavage. And we will get into Y-shaped cleavage because it's great, but it needs a couple of very specific conditions to occur. Now, the next thing is to talk about how gravity affects them on a body that, for instance, is lying down. So they will sort of roll off the torso, sort of like drops of water on a car window, but they're sort of attached. So it's worth considering how far they'll go before they stop moving, before the skin holds them in place. So a character here, we'll do a pair of enormous boobs on them just because it's easier to represent that movement when we've got a lot of mass to move. So we'll have a character being viewed from above, and we'll have them lying down, and you'll see how when we draw the breasts, the most important thing we do is describe them based on gravity. Since they're not attached to bones like muscles are, they move solely based on gravity or like movement or external manipulation. So in this case, you can see that they're rolling down off to the sides because they naturally move and sort of face away from each other, and that movement away is going to be further expanded by them lying on their back and that gravity pulling them down to the sides. And so you can see that mass of where they attach stays the same, but they'll pull off to the sides, but there'll still be that ridge there. Now, on then to that Y-shaped cleavage we talked about. So Y-shaped cleavage doesn't happen very readily. Three things must be met. Condition 1, they have to be big enough for there to be cleavage. Condition 2, you have to have something that is pushing them together, either them leaning forward, that sort of pendulum-like force of gravity, or external manipulation like a shirt or hands. And then they have to be pushed up as well to create that Y shape, where they actually have to have a skin fold happen along the edge there. So we'll have two demonstrations here. I'm going to start with the, in my view, superior of the Y-shaped cleavage, which is the reverse Y shape, which is where we'll have a character. So criteria 1, we have to have large breasts. Criteria 2, we have to have them together. And criteria 3, we have to have upward or downward movement or pressure applied to them. So here we'll have the arms pushing down and together, and that's going to deform the shape, and it's also going to push them into a ridge in the middle. And you can see it's got that upside down Y shape underneath it. And that's one of the things that will happen when we have it viewed from the right angle with external pressure placed on it. It will not naturally form those kinds of folds and shapes. If left to their own devices, they'll sit out facing away from each other. And now we'll do the normal Y-shaped cleavage, where we're viewing them front on and they're being pushed up. So we'll start them with just basic head, rib cage, shoulders. Remembering those collarbones in. The collarbones are the very sort of critical element. And then we've got the shoulders there. And since the arms are lifting up, the shoulders are going to lift a little bit as well. And we'll draw the hands there, lifting them up. Now, just before we actually draw them in, what I think might help, we'll draw the breast without being moved so we can see where and what volume is being displaced. So you can see if we draw the breasts in normally, you can see that there's an overlap of placement between where the hands are and where the breast would be. That tells us how much they would need to be displaced by. Obviously you don't have to draw that, it's just worth keeping in mind. And we're going to draw them based on their displacement on the area of contact. So that's that edge of the hand there and the direction of movement, so up and inwards. And that causes then them to squish together, and at the top, that difference in mass will actually fold over. And you'll get that Y shape where the skin actually folds over because they're being pushed up and in so much. That's what gets you the Y shape. That's the skin folding. It has to fold to do it. If they're just sort of sitting or hanging or being pushed in together from the sides, they won't do it. They have to be pushed up as well. Now we'll do just a bit of lighting to map them out. With low angles, I always feel like a backlighting works better, whereas something that's front on, like a standard light, will tend to work better with just a sort of standard from above light. And so those are the different shapes. You can see you need that external pressure to be able to do it. Now, next thing I want to do, we'll get the figure drawn out that we're going to build it on. So we'll just do like head and the rib cage, the shoulders on there as well. And we're going to lift one arm up, but leave the other arm down. Because one of the reasons I talk so much about the breasts being attached to the shoulder is because if the shoulders move, the breasts move as well, which means if the arm moves up, the shoulder moves up. And if the shoulder moves up, the breasts move up as well. So we'll do the structure out on one side for a breast there and join it into the shoulder. And since we can see that if they were even, the other breast would have its bottom point along that same parallel line. But since there's a difference in the height of the shoulders by that much, then there'll be a difference in the height of the breast by the same amount. As the muscle and flesh is pulled up towards the tip of the shoulder and the shoulder moves up, it'll pull the rest of the flesh with it. And now, with that then, we'll go over and do a bit of line art to it, and you can see that it'll look more natural, that part of the body is more sort of fleshy, more dynamic, and more moving, even with a very simple position of just one arm being raised behind the head. You can communicate that of the body. So now, I'll go through and do a demonstration of about 15 figures. We'll do 10 female, 5 male, and we'll go over applying these processes, different bust sizes and poses. So we'll start then with just the basic framework of the head and shoulders, and we'll do another one of the large breast lying down, just to demonstrate that. One of the things here is to make sure the volumes match. That's why I'm moving that one out a little bit to the side. And now we'll do another one with not very much bust, but it can be handy to tilt a character like that out to the side, because from the front you won't really see anything, but there is still a bit of shape you'll get when viewed from the side. And now we'll do an absolutely massive pair from above. And one of the things that's worth remembering with this is how it affects your surface planes and cast shadows. So drawing them out there, so with the ribcage tilted back, they can come forward because they'll go along the ribcage. And then when we drop tone on them later, we're going to keep that in mind because it's going to make a big cast shadow. It's a really great way to show depth by using something that casts a shadow, like under the neck we'll always do it. And now from the back here, using that as a demonstration for simplified shapes of the muscles of the back. So the shoulder blades and a bit of the breast coming around the side there. Remembering that you won't really see the front of them from the back or side, so the things you would put a bikini over to cover won't be visible. And so here we'll have a character on their back with sort of small and medium-sized breasts. So the same thing will occur where they sort of gravitate towards the sides, and they won't have that same sort of motion of going all the way down because there's not as much of them to move. And then we can have this one to demonstrate how external pressure or objects can manipulate them. So these are really large ones, but they're leaning on like a fence, which means they're coming out forward like they're on a shelf. And so here we'll do another arms raised one from a very low angle. And this one's going to help illustrate how much they move up. So an angle to the rib cage and the arms together can mean that the shape of them almost reaches the chin, and with large enough ones they can actually overtake it. as a way of sort of helping show that depth. I'm just fiddling around with the face there. And now here, we'll do the basic face on it, and we'll have them leaning forward, and we want to have them being manipulated by just the upper arms. So since they're being pushed in together, but not upwards, we won't get a Y-shaped cleavage, because they're not really being lifted enough for the skin to fold over, but we will still get cleavage in the middle, because the upper arms are pushing them together. And we'll have that character, like, you know, squatting to sort of pull the body in and around. And here, just a straight on one. Now this one's going to show how you'll have those, I think they're called lats, the ones that come under the arm. They'll be visible from the front, so long as the arms are lifted out, you'll be able to see them joining up to the shoulder. So those muscles on the back are relevant even when you're drawing a character from the front. I'm just drawing that down there. And now the next character here, we'll do them pushing on one, but not pushing on the other. So this is that Y-shaped cleavage we talked about just before, but we're going to have it just from one side. And so you see you won't get the Y-shaped cleavage on this one, but you will get one being moved over by the hand and the other one sitting down to the side due to gravity. And so those differences of behavior are going to be how you communicate the fleshiness, how you communicate them as being, you know, what they are. Because bones and muscles are defined by what they connect to. They're a sort of rigid shape with rigid connections. Whereas masses of fat, they're a lot more like the hair, that they're tethered at one point, but they're shaped by the environment, by gravity, by movement, by physical manipulation. And now here we'll do a few male figures. So here's one, just a basic figure, you know, smaller eyes, larger chest to help it look sort of more male presenting. And using those guidelines to place the masses of muscle. Again, we're only using very simplified musculature here. So we'll do that line down there, and then that band for the abs. So the mid third of the torso is abs, the top third of the torso is pecs, the bottom third of the torso is the pelvis. Now I'll be more sort of definitive with the muscles on the male presenting figures. And so the same thing as before, that big sort of diamond shape down for the muscles in the back of the neck, and then those radial shapes that come out from the balls of the shoulder for the shoulder blades, and then doing the rest of the lats as they wrap around the body, and then doing another male butt on here, remembering that the male butt, if you want to have it really musculature, you dent the sides of it in because it doesn't have that extra layer of fat on it like a female butt will. And so here we'll have a male character bending over forward and sort of folding in on themselves. And so you can see when we see the rib cage from a higher angle, the collarbones sit much lower, they're much more visibly low, because they're one of the things that sits out on the front. So that angle will really change how we place them. And then we're just sort of compressing the abdomen in there. Now here's one where we'll have that lifting of the arm. We'll have like a very muscular arm, and we'll really lift it up to really show how it moves around all those muscles of the chest there. So you can see that pec there being pulled right up and really changing that shape. And then we've got the other one, which is down. The other thing that can be tricky to do, and I had to retry it here, was getting the spacing right for them. So the abs there, I was doing them at the same sort of shape as I do them from the front, but they're being viewed from a low angle, which means you draw them thinner, and they're being compressed, which means you draw them thinner still. So I had to reassess that and make them a lot thinner because I was drawing them wrong, basically. And here, just a basic one with the arm lifted. I wanted this one, and it'll show up more once I do some tone on it, to highlight that difference in surface plane on a male character of the rib cage that can really help you give the shape of the male chest a lot more depth. So with a female chest, you can add breasts to give it more depth, easy. Now with a male chest, one of the things, or with a character that has less breast going on, is you can use the lower ridge of the rib cage as a surface plane for it to drop off of, to give yourself a sort of edge to do a big dark shadow with. So even though we'll put all the detail in and we'll make it look like they're pretty much straight on, and they are, using shadow can be a great way of communicating that depth, and we'll come back to that one in a second. And now, just adding a bit of tone on here. You can see with like a character that hasn't got a lot going on, you want to try and find excuses to do big areas of shadow to give them that depth, or they will look not just sort of flat, as it were, but the illustration will look flat. So especially things like the shadow there cast by the back, with the bend to the back, or sending one arm all the way back, or here with a large breast, doing a really big drop shadow that comes down as they sort of cast a shadow like the brim of a hat. Whereas this one with a very soft lining, we're left with only a few spots to put dark shadows, like under the arm and under the neck. Whereas here we've got the breast coming forward, so we can use that to cast a really good drop shadow over that area of the body. This one here, the only big shadow we can do is under the chin because they're standing out pretty much straight. But just find those places to do big areas of shadow to help you describe with some depth. And the large sort of male characters here, we can do much sort of more angular shadows. That can really help you make the character look more sort of ripped and muscular, if that's what you want to do. And thinking of areas like, you know, the lower back there being darkened with just the butts being lit up there. Whereas this one with them being bent over, their whole sort of body's like a cave, so it's easy to find a lot of areas to darken on that figure. And you can even do a little bit of dark a bit further in. Whereas this one, the darkest areas are probably under the arm there. And now here, you see we'll put a big dark area underneath the rib cage there, and that really helps us sort of make those separate surface planes. And now I'm just going to pop a bit of shines on here to help communicate some of the sort of the fleshiness to it. And that can really help. And now doing just a bit of extra darkness, you can see I'm doing in the lower male figures there, to really sort of chisel those shadows in and really pronounce those light and dark areas. So that's that. Now moving on then, there'll be part 2 linked. That'll be where I'll use this to make a complete illustration of multiple variants of that character. You can also follow along yourself with the homework sheet that'll be in the description. Drop that into the Discord, say hi there, maybe show off your other works. We've also got a great critique section, and again, we've got those monthly activities going. And with that, thank you very much for your time. Again, if you like the video and you'd like to see more like it or more consistently, consider becoming a Patreon member. But and yeah, press the like, subscribe. But I don't like the call to action stuff, but I really do need to ask it. So press buttons, say things, please. I think, or don't. I don't know. I'm not your dad. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'll see you in part 2. That should be up in a day or two. And if this video is a day or two old, maybe I'll see you there right away. You have a good day. Cheers.